what we needed. Perfect. Okay. Good evening, everybody. Evening. Thank you very much for joining this evening, whether you're here in the room or whether you're online. I should say good evening to you here in the room and good morning to you online. I assume if you're online, it's because you're in Japan or Australia or something and you couldn't remember. Or also good evening and you're saving yourself a drive. Yeah, so if you're online, it looked like nothing was happening, but something was, don't worry about it. Okay, let's get started. Yeah, so thank you for coming tonight. I'm excited to talk about this. I'm a little bit concerned because I have a bad habit of going on tangents, and I'm very, very enthusiastic about this topic. So for that reason, not to be rude or a jerk, but please don't ask questions until we're at the end, because if you get me going, we're not going to make it. uh, yeah, so what we're going to talk about tonight is reptiles and amphibians in our region, and more specifically, some of the efforts we've been making to get a better handle on where they are and how they're doing in our region, to build a better database of sorts in terms of their presence and their status. And most reptiles and amphibians are kind of cryptic, so that's actually difficult. It's a bit of work. Sometimes you're lucky and you see one. Most of the times it takes a bit of effort. And whenever you're studying anything in the life sciences, whether you're studying a particular group of organisms, just a specific species of animal, or whether you're studying a whole community of animals and or a whole habitat and how everything interacts ecologically, you have to start with some pretty important base questions. What is it? And where is it? And the third question for us at the beginning, what did that? What are you looking at right now? Don't answer if you think you know, but there's some tracks in the first photo. Now, don't answer, but if you think you know what it is, put up your hand. Wow. Okay, don't answer. We're going to get to a slide that says, what have we learned? And on that slide, there's going to be a picture of the species that made that. So we'll see. Okay. But in terms of learning more about what things are and where they are, that's the basics of being a field naturalist. Oh, come on, Zoom. Hey. So let's start with some basics. Just some basics about reptiles and amphibians, which we collectively refer to as herps in our region. So in our region, there are 34 native species. I'm going to tell you what they all are as we move through the presentation. 32 of them are still here in the region. 2 of the turtles are most likely gone locally, extirpated from our region. Now, they still live in Canada. They're not extirpated from Canada. They still live in parts of Ontario. You just have to go for a longer drive to find them. But locally, we have lost 2 species as far as we know. We also know there are no exotic species of reptiles or amphibians that are established locally, which isn't to say they aren't sometimes found. There's some released pets on occasion. There's red-eared sliders and Mississippi map turtles from the pet trade. There was a ball python in Gatineau Park once. And brown and Knowles, a little lizard, occasionally hitchhike on shipments of flowers and produce up from Florida. And most of the time, these escapees and releasees, if that's a word, they don't survive the winter. And even those that might be able to, like red-eared sliders, in our region haven't really established or persisted yet. In other parts of Ontario, they have, but not here. Now, as you move out of our region, as you move southwest towards Kingston, you very quickly get into more herpetological diversity. You quickly pick up 2 more snake species and a lizard. And as you move west or southwest into the province, that diversity continues to grow. I should say, when we're talking about the region tonight, the region that our our efforts have really been focused on aren't Eastern Ontario in the general broad sense, but like extreme Eastern Ontario. So Ottawa and everything east, everything on the east side of the Frontenac Arch to the Quebec border. So the Smiths Falls, limestone plain kind of formation, and then the various clay and sand plains to the east of that that lie between the Ottawa and the St. Lawrence rivers, that little peninsula, the Ontario Peninsula, if you will. So why are we looking at this now? Haven't we looked at this before? Well, yeah, we kind of have. I mean, actually, that thing on the left there is an article from 1981 by Dr. Francis Cook, who was a longtime OFNC member, editor of Canadian Field Naturalist, and the curator of herpetology at the Nature Museum. But like I said, he wrote that in 1981. It was a revision of a series of papers he wrote in 1968. And that for a long time was like the definitive reference for our region on that level. And in 1984, the Natural Heritage Information Center, part at that time of the Ministry of Natural Resources, started what was called the Ontario Herpetofaunal Summary. And they looked at all of the records they could gather and encouraged people to submit across the entire province because like, we need some baseline data. And their thinking was, how do we just get that base understanding of what is here and where is it? How's it doing? To know how it's doing and how it's doing over time, we first need that baseline. So that herpetofaunal summary was a good start. It hadn't been done in such a comprehensive way before. And it used a format that you've probably seen before if you're a birder, and that you would have seen again if you participated in this thing. In 2009, Ontario Nature got funding to basically revamp the herpetofaunal summary, and they launched the Ontario Reptile and Amphibian Atlas. This took the model of the bird breeding atlas and that series of grid squares, the 10 by 10 kilometer UTM map squares projected across the whole province, and we mapped reptiles and amphibians, all of the species, across the province with the historic records we had and anything new. But what was really cool about the Ontario Reptile and Amphibian Atlas is it started, well, recently. It started at this time. And think about what or how our experience and interaction with nature was changing at this time in a good way. We had digital photography suddenly readily available to lots of people, and phones very quickly, smartphones. We had social media. We had a way to engage with and mobilize so many people who are interested in nature and conservation and wildlife to contribute their observations. Citizen science on a level that we weren't able to really do before the internet and some of this new technology made it possible. And I really like the photo they used as the splash pad. This is the old homepage where you go to submit a sighting. And just to digress a little, a planned digression, don't worry. That's on the left, that's a northern map turtle. It's a baby northern map turtle. That's a baby painted turtle. Those two, each one of those is about the size of a toonie. And they're literally basking on a stick. And that stick is floating in the water at Petrie Island here in Ottawa. The reason I know that is because I took this photo. And they used it for this. And I was pretty happy to see that when I went to the page and like, wait, I've seen this before. I submitted that on observation. I was in a canoe and got very lucky. So I was a pretty big contributor to this, and contributing to this was also very fun and interactive because you would go out and observe nature as we all like to do, and you would see something like a spotted salamander. Cool. Don't find them all the time. When you find them, it's exciting. And then you'd take a picture, and you'd submit it to the atlas with where you found it and some other details. And they had these maps, right? If what you submitted was significant, was changing the map, you'd get atlas feedback, and it looked like this. Congratulations, what you just found changed the map, basically. The spotted salamander you just find has never been found in this square before. So you're changing it, and that's so exciting to know that not only did you find it, but that your contribution made a difference. And a lot of the time, it's not that no one had ever found it before, it's that no one had ever recorded it before. And that's important because we all see things all the time that don't go recorded. You can't get everything, but sometimes across a lot of us, we're seeing significant things, and collectively through citizen science projects like this, we can improve our overall understanding of all of these species. And what was happening, what piqued my interest, was not that this happened this one time. It happened so many times. I only screenshotted a few of these and I can't get them anymore, but there were so many, and it wasn't just me. Obviously I have mine, but and look at this. Look at the species. Eastern red-backed salamander, wood frog, eastern garter snake. These aren't the most cryptic or the rarest of our species, and yet with observations of relatively abundant and easy to find species, we're changing the map. We're finding data that hasn't been found before or hasn't been found in a very long time. And that in itself suggests that in the area where we were looking, the search effort historically has been very low. Well, maybe there's more to find here. Maybe there's more to the story. What about the harder to find things? So this was really encouraging and motivating. And so here's the map. This is a screenshot of the old atlas map. The final atlas maps are still online and you can explore them, and they look a little bit different. You'll see shortly. But the atlas maps look like this. And red are 10 by 10 squares where the sightings are historical only, so more than 20 years old. Yellow are the squares where there's only a new record, so it's novel data. And green are squares where there was both historical and new data, so we have evidence of continued presence, which is important. And as you can see, there's big gaps between the red squares and the green squares, and we would assume that the distribution of the species is maybe filling in some of those gaps. So these yellow squares are not really that much of a surprise. And by the way, does the laser work? It does. The first one I showed you for the spotted salamander is new. It was that square right there. So if you're online, just to the right of the word Gatineau, where the 174 shield is, that's in suburban Ottawa. I can walk to the site from my house. In fact, I think I did. So it's not like we even have to go very far to find novel things or undocumented things. And the picture I showed you wasn't there. That picture I showed you was from here somewhere. And so it was the year after the Atlas collection ended, so it's not on the map. And also the site where it was found has been clear cut. That's a little disheartening, but also why this is important. So just for a sec, before we move along, look at the thing about this map. Not only are there big spaces where there's no data on this salamander that's purportedly widespread, look at Eastern Ontario. Look at that space there. Why is it empty? Now, that pattern on the maps keeps coming up too. And that too was piquing my curiosity. So moving on, the Atlas collection wound up. Funding doesn't last forever, and it turned into a decade-long odyssey of data collection and processing, and it finally has turned into a really lovely publication. If you like flipping through ebooks on the internet in your browser or on your phone, you can do that for free. This is on the Ontario Nature website. Pretty easy to find with a little Google. If you want a hard copy of it, it's a big tome. It's $100 or a little more, I think. It's a big tome. There was a copy of the 2005 bird breeding atlas on the back table that is similar in size and dimensions. If you want a hard copy, Ontario Nature still has some, so you can go again a little Google and order it through their website. If you want, I prefer the flip tactilely still, so I have a copy. Yeah, so it's a good resource, and it revealed a lot, and we learned a lot through it, but it ended and we were still finding things. And I had this impression that it couldn't be done because we had too much more to do, and it wasn't just that we were still finding things, it was that we were still finding things with relative ease, with relatively little effort at a site. We would show up, look, find a few things, and those would be novel records. So we were also left with these bizarre patterns. So I mentioned the spotted salamander void there in Eastern Ontario. This is northern water snake. This is the current map from iNaturalist. Now there are some biases for where there's more effort. iNaturalist is biased for newer records. It doesn't have a ton of historical stuff, and it's biased for urban areas because obviously more people doing more stuff are closer to cities. But setting that aside, what in the heck are we looking at? Why? As a distribution, just why? It's a line. And it's not like they don't live north of the Ottawa River. They do. Or south of it. They do. And they live in Montreal. Why is Eastern Ontario empty? Well, there's a few theories, a few possible explanations. And if it was just this species, okay, or just snakes, but it's not. Here's another snake that does almost the same thing. Eastern milk snake. Very similar, right? We hit the edge, we hit the 416 basically, and they're sparse or absent, except a little bit right here in Ottawa, which could be search effort related. But they're continue in New York State. New York, by the way, is very undersampled. And I forgot to put this in just to illustrate it. But if you look on iNaturalist, look at a common plant like sugar maple, and look at the map on iNaturalist, and look at New York and look at Vermont. And you'll see what I'm talking about. Vermont has a very active group of naturalists, and they do a lot in the field. So Vermont is like dense with these red dots, and New York has like scattered red dots. And it's not actually different on the ground, it's search effort. So scattered dots in New York is good at this point. But back to our region, it's on the left side, it's on the right side, it's on the south side. Why is this like this? It's strange, you know. One of the theories involves the Champlain Sea beds clay. There's some more geographical diversity in the center of this than that, but also the Champlain Sea beds clay is also southern Quebec where they are present, and the Champlain Valley where they're very present. So, in Montreal. So I don't know. I don't know about that one. Here's the ribbon snake. This one's very odd. It doesn't continue past, but it seems to hit a wall in a very similar way. It's not found in the Montreal region. It's only known in Quebec in this region around Shawville. But it does this weird thing where it follows the southern edge of the Frontenac Arch and then shoots up into the Arnprior area. It is in the city of Ottawa, just a little bit in the Morris Island Conservation Area corner, where a few people have successfully seen it recently. I believe Lynn has seen it there. I'm pretty sure it was yours at iNaturalist. I know Dave found one. He's here. So they turn up, but they're not easy to find, but they're there. But then again, why? Why is it like this? So these questions just sort of motivate me to keep going and keep looking, and keep learning. And so it's not just these three snakes, and it's not just snakes that have these weird patterns and these weird data gaps. So we started an iNaturalist project in 2020. Looks like this. We started it at the time with a format that we needed to use to get data on the species we needed to survey. And you had to add your observation manually to the project. But through this, we motivated some continued effort and we gathered some more data and we learned a few more things. And that's what we're talking about. What have we learned in the last 6 years of continued field survey work? Remember what I said about the turtle tracks? What have we learned? There is your culprit. So the title slide was tracks in a wetland left by a Blandings turtle. Mystery solved. Okay. So what have we learned? Lots. And I actually can't talk about it all tonight. We do not have time. I could do a whole talk on like pick a species and I could make the whole talk on the one. We're not going to do that. So I'm going to go through the species groups, tell you a little bit about their general status, and then highlight a couple in each of the major reptile and amphibian groups, or amphibian and reptile groups, because that's the order. But we learned a few general things. So in some of this, we knew we were going to get very early on in the process. So in 2021, I did a talk on the snakes of Ottawa while we were in the pandemic. I think it's still on our YouTube channel. If you want a longer spiel on each of the individual snakes and how to ID them, that's there. But for that, I took the maps from that 1981 article by Francis Cook, and I updated them with the data we'd gathered more recently. So as you can see on the left, the original map from 81, notice, in keeping with the pattern, the west side of the map is a little bit heavier for presence. There's more dots on the west side. It's west biased for whatever reason. And with our more recent effort, the relatively common northern red-bellied snake, well, it looks a little bit more evenly distributed. We found plenty of it on both sides. This isn't the most commonly seen snake in our region, but it probably is the most common snake in our region. So that was interesting. But what I really like about this project and leveraging iNaturalist as a tool is that making these was really tedious, and I don't have to anymore because it's just right there. And we have this dynamic map projected over satellite imagery, and you can zoom in and zoom out and explore it, and you can filter it for different dates if you want to do some time stuff, if the data is present. And yeah, with all of the recent stuff in there, across that space of Eastern Ontario, the red-bellied snake is generally present, at least where there's habitat, which I think is a key part of the answer here, at least where there's habitat. But we'll get to it. And then there's other little nuancy things we can do. And we can look into, that water snake map with the wall we just talked about that was weird. We can look into the details of that too. Oh, right. I was just going to show you a northern red-bellied snake. It's not fair for me to talk about them and not show you one. The one on the right, or the bottom, the brown one, is a northern red-bellied snake, an adult. The garter snake behind it is a juvenile. They're also our smallest snake species, and they mostly eat slugs. So they're your friend if you garden. Yeah. But yeah, the water snake thing. So here's some local detail using iNaturalist. It hits that wall in Ontario, and the Atlas map shows that wall, but it only shows Ontario data. But an advantage is we can look at data across the border too. The snake doesn't know what province it's in. And so the end of the line in Ottawa for water snakes is Mud Lake, which I'm sure most of you know very well. And you can't, I've found them there. They're a bit of work. It's not the easiest place to see them, but they're there pretty consistently. But then on this side of the river, that's it. And why? There is a record from about 1981 at Petrie Island, which is there at the top right of the screen. And as you can see, there's some places on the north side in Quebec that still have the snake. If we were just using the Atlas, we wouldn't know about those. So it does continue past whatever that thing is making the wall. And so what's going on? Is it the 60s, the 1960s, the south shore of the river in the East End was heavily modified to stop erosion due to the Lee to Clay and the bluffs that formerly existed there when they put that parkway in, the Ottawa River Parkway? Did that destroy habitat that they had in the uplands that they used for hibernation? Maybe. Don't know for sure. Speculation. Is the urban development and the major roadways between Petrie Island and the big limestone escarpment in Orleans the reason why they're not there now? It's great summer habitat for them. It's perfect. But they need to hibernate on land and out of the water. And I don't think they can get there. That might be what's going on there. But that's speculation too. But this is a start. So these are the kinds of things that we're able to explore with the data. So again, right, this is a northern water snake. Because it's not fair for me to talk about them and not show you. Yeah. So let's start with the frogs, with the anurans, if you will. Anurans is a nice technical term that includes the toads. Uh, so on the left-hand side, these are all of the species that are part of our region. And for the most part, across Southern Ontario, this is the same list. In Southwestern Ontario, you lose mink frogs and you gain Fowler's toads, and the Blanchard's cricket frog, which used to live down there, is extirpated. But frog diversity is more continuous than the other groups in a more widespread way. And I'm happy to tell you that most of the left side there, bullfrogs, green frogs, wood frogs, leopard frogs, toads, great tree frogs, and spring peepers are all pretty widespread and pretty common in appropriate habitat. They're all doing okay. They're obviously not in, not in Sandy Hill or, necessarily not in Lower Town. They're not in urban parts of the town, but if there's a little bit of green space, some of them are present. And just outside the city or in the green belt, most of them tend to be present with some weird nuances. The chorus frog isn't doing very well, but that we already knew too. It was formerly, it is widespread, formerly abundant in all kinds of little habitats. A puddle on a farm field, there'd be chorus frogs breeding in the spring. It was easy to hear them, never easy to actually see them, but easy to hear them. And they used to be common. And suddenly, the eastern population crashed. And we don't entirely know why. It suddenly became very localized very quickly and hard to find. And the numbers are low. And there's a lot of concern. But we know that. And Kasiwik knows that, and they're endangered. This population is formally endangered. And that means there's funding. Species at risk get money. That means they get research and they get surveys and they get monitoring effort. Maybe not enough, but something. Somebody can get paid to work on this problem. We know about it. We've identified it. That's important. That's an important starting point. The two frogs I want to talk about are the lesser known ones. And I should say, the reason we actually have decent data too, whether or not they're doing well, we have decent data on the left-hand side because all of those do this thing that none of the other amphibians or reptiles do that's really convenient. In the springtime, they make noise. Lots of noise. They have breeding calls, and because of that, we don't have to physically find and see them. We can stand back and listen. We can drive around to wetlands and stand on the side of the road and listen and hear all of the species that are present and gauge relative abundance based on how vigorously they're calling. And so those call surveys, there's something called the Marsh Monitoring Program and some other initiatives have been going on for a long time. We actually have good data on frogs, most frogs. We don't on mink frogs or pickerel frogs because the call surveys don't work. Mink frogs breed too late. Mink frogs breed a little later, mid-June, usually good to hear them. And people aren't familiar with that sound. So you have to look at an odd time when there aren't other frogs that don't get captured in those springtime surveys. And they're a little more particular in habitat. And then pickerel frogs are an issue for two reasons. One is they sound a lot like northern leopard frogs. And number two is they do this thing where they call underwater. So when you're on a roadside 100 meters away, you don't hear it. You gotta be there, like right there. For these two, it's like a turtle or a snake or salamander. You kind of have to see it most of the time to be able to show that it's present. So we're starting behind the line on these two. So here's a mink frog. Who's seen a mink frog? A few people. That's great. That's great. You're pathologically inclined people, but still, I could have predicted those hands. So here, this is a mink frog. They also they get confused with green frogs a little bit. There's some ID confusion that happens. They have very webbed feet, which is something people forget to look at most of the time. It's not sticking its tongue out. There's a little piece of plant in front of it. That's what the red thing is. And I don't believe in misleading Photoshop, so I left the plant thing in the water. But here's another one. And this is the other part of their ecology is they like cold, clear water, which suggests unsilted and unpolluted. So there you go. But also they're in it. They're a very aquatic species. And when you find them, they're doing this. They're floating or they're sitting in the water near the edge. They're not on the bank. They're not up on the path 20 meters from the water. They're not on the road, usually. If these guys are out of the water, it's because it's a migration. It's a movement, and it's a rainy night or otherwise an extremely moist night. It's the only time these things are out of the water. Other frogs are a little more adventurous, a little more uncautious, if you will, about when they leave the safety of their aquatic haunts. But these are very, very loyal to it. So that too means to see them, most of the time, you don't have the opportunity to see them from shore, except in odd situations, like where I took these photos. Most of the time, you got to be in the water, in hip waders or getting wet, or in a canoe. And when you're doing that, you're also scaring the frogs away. So it's challenging to observe them, to say the least. So because of all that, hard to observe, hard to hear, very particular with water quality. The hole in Eastern Ontario is, familiar, but maybe not unexpected. Now there is a dot there, and that's a real dot. That's a Gary Fenn. The Atlas had them there too. They've been there for a while, as far as we know. And that's a large wetland complex with cool, clear water, what they like. So they're still there. And we can infer with reasonable confidence that all of this area here might just be a little too modified, a little too agricultural to retain enough large, unsilted, unpolluted wetlands that stay cool enough for mink frogs. Because as soon as you get up into the Laurentians or down into the Adirondacks or over into the Atlantic Islands or the Frontenac Arch, they reappear. And yeah, as you move towards Montreal and the St. Lawrence lowlands, there's a lot of farming. They're not there. So that tracks, right? That makes sense. And the other thing where the coldness of that water becomes very important is they are a very northern species. Their Latin name, Lithobates septentrionalis. Septentrionalis means northern. And here's the global range. That's it. That's the southern limit. We're at it. They don't really hit the Lake Ontario basin. The Adirondacks are the southernmost occurrences. So there's already, a disadvantage in the warm St. Lawrence lowlands if we modify the wetland habitat and disrupt the cold water environments. They go very far north. They go up to James Bay. They go up to Labrador. Yeah, a boreal frog species. They're pretty cool, but yeah, definitely underdocumented. Definitely we could do more with these, but because of this and just the general situation, I'm not too concerned in a broad sense. I wish we had them in more wetlands still, but not too concerned. But this is a pickerel frog. These do concern me a little bit. I am worried about these. So, like I said, they sound like a bit like northern leopard frogs when they call. They're hard to hear, and they look a bit like northern leopard frogs, especially The less experience you have, the more confusing they are. The more practice you have, the easier this gets. You're a little bit quicker on noticing right away you've got a pickerel. So there's some field marks we could teach you, but not why we're here. But pickerel frogs, like mink frogs, like cold water and unpolluted water. So they have a more of an affinity for higher quality habitat than the other frogs do, or more of an obligation to higher quality habitat. And this is our mount for our region right now. They're in Gatineau Park, which is great. And the Frontenac Arch, the southern part of the Frontenac Arch, is actually a really great place to see them. I saw them there a couple weeks ago with Ontario Nature. But why this is odd, is because not only are they absent from this huge swath of Eastern Ontario, look at how much that swath goes like southern Quebec, east of Montreal, and west of here too, where we tend to pick up species that are absent from the far east into the highlands and where there's still some forest. Like what's going on with Lanark and Renfrew counties with nothing? They're in Algonquin Park. It's I find this concerning because it suggests to me that there's something more to this story than just agriculture made the water warm, right? And the thing is, historically, we know this wasn't like this because of the atlas. We have a record, actually, a very old record from Dow's Swamp. So they used to live right in town, around where Carleton University sits. But here's the atlas. So we've got some historical records, and remember, we're never expecting the same density on the old stuff, but we've got them in Eastern Ontario, or we've got them in Lanark County, around Ottawa, and in some of those gaps. But also notice all those red squares. All those red squares are where the records are only old, and we haven't reconfirmed them more, presently. Lots of red, lots of red. And I should note, this is the final version of the Atlas map. These are online. The Toronto Entomological Association hosts them for Ontario Nature. So you can go explore these online if you want. And they changed the green to blue. And I believe the reason is because if you are colorblind, this color scale is easier for you. That's my understanding as to why. So we didn't green light things, we blue light things, but same effect. And so let me highlight again in a different way. Let me give you the iNaturalist map at the same scale. Notice the vacancies. Again, iNaturalist is biased to new observations. It hasn't been around forever. Doesn't have a lot of old stuff uploaded to it. So this is where it's showing up. Gatineau Park and the Laurentians. The southern Frontenac Arch, but not all of the shield. Some Kawartha Lake stuff. Along the Niagara Escarpment seems to be good, and then across Grey County for some reason. And then that thing south of London, which is Port Burwell, or it's some creek system in that area. And then one thing that is new out of our region, but they've been found at the Pinery Provincial Park, and the Atlas didn't pick them up there. So that's kind of one little new tidbit, which is cool, but way far west for what we're talking about. But this patchy distribution concerns me when we know that it wasn't always this way, right? That concerns me. More so when you look at it in a global context. It's becoming a Appalachian and Eastern seaboard species. They're doing well on the East Coast. But off the East Coast, for some reason, look how patchy that is. The stuff in Quebec on the north side of the St. Lawrence is disjunct. The stuff in Ontario, as we've already seen, is very patchy and disjunct. Michigan, Wisconsin, same thing. Like the patches through the Midwest in the Mississippi Valley, it's notice it's lighter in color because there's less density of observations, and the spread between these. I don't think we know what's going on with them. Also, why are they doing well in one place and not well in another place? Like the whole, are there cryptic species involved question could come up, but that's a whole other thing. But regardless, like this is odd. We have seen this with other frogs, like our chorus frog, but nobody's looked at this. These have no species at risk status. And the high quality habitats that these frogs need aren't protected because those frogs are there. That's not part of our decision-making process in conservation at the moment. And that's part of where we're going with this. So let's look at another group. Salamanders. Let's round out the amphibians. We've got less of them. We've got 7 species plus the unisexual lineage that's dependent on blue-spotted salamanders, but I'm not going to talk about that. And so on the left, the ones we're not going to focus on tonight, mud puppy, red-spotted newt, spotted salamander, which I showed you, blue-spotted salamanders, and red-backed salamanders. They're all widespread, and that's as far as I'll go. Some of them are abundant locally in appropriate habitat. Every single species here is a story right now. So we're going to stay focused. And I just want to talk about these 2 weird ones that we talk about less because I think they're very interesting in their own rights. So 2-line salamanders. This guy, who's seen a 2-line salamander? A few, the herpetologically inclined folks. Yeah, okay. Not too many people. Not too many people. One reason, if you've looked for salamanders but never seen this, is because they live in a completely different place. They live in a different kind of habitat. They have a different ecology. Most of the salamanders we're used to looking for, or you search the forest floor or around breeding ponds in the spring. But these guys, they hang out in streams. They're part of a group. They're not related, but it's an ecological relationship, the group that we call the streamside salamanders. They get very diverse and very interesting in the Appalachian Range, and something I'm mildly obsessed with. But we seem to only have the one for sure. And yeah, it's very pretty too. Golden thing coming out of the murk in a stream because you moved a little rock or something. It's very fun when you find them. And this is what the habitat looks like. Right. So already we know in an intensely altered part of the landscape, higher quality habitat with clear, nice streams and forests. Not a lot of this left. Probably a lot of this that's been lost, but not a lot of this left. This is in a privately owned woodlot in Eastern Ontario where we found them recently. And this woodlot is like 10 hectares of old growth sugar maple stuff. That's it. And it's surrounded by agriculture, and I really didn't think they'd be in there. And I was describing how it looks like a nice place and moved a rock, and there was one. That was pretty fun to find them in this one. But that's the kind of place we need to search. And so finding a place like this that still exists, that's also accessible on public land, and that's also searchable, that has cover objects you can actually move without dying or falling into the water. Less of an exaggeration than it sounds. Yeah, they're a bit of a slog in terms of search. And no, that's a baby, by the way. This is not a baby, a larva. Their larval stage lives in the stream, and that's the tip of my index finger. So that's yeah, they're pretty cool. But good news, in a sense, this is the atlas at its conclusion. And we'd found a couple of these new things ourselves as OFNC ventures. And since then, we've found more. The squares aren't as big, but if you look east of those yellow squares, there's nothing. And if you look on this map, there's a bunch in that area. We've been busy, and we've confirmed these in a bunch of locations in the far eastern part of Ontario, as well as a site right in Ottawa that we'd speculated had them for years, but never confirmed until I got really bored during the pandemic and spent way too much time in the mud and got that thing on my fingertip. But yeah, I mean, among other places, Voyageur Provincial Park has a population. They didn't even know about it. We found it. And yeah, so in good habitat, they're still there and they're persisting in surprisingly small remnants in some cases, which is good. That's good news. And it means that this gap is a bit of a false gap, most likely. It means that the gap isn't a natural absence so much as something that's a combination of search effort and anthropogenic conditions. So we messed up the landscape and then didn't bother looking in what's left. So interesting. There's a lot more work to do, and they have a very odd distribution in a global sense. And again, another advantage of iNaturalist is I don't have to do this. I don't have to stitch this New York map onto the Ontario map and try to give you the context of where it sits, because they're throughout New York State. Like any stream is a candidate in New York State, unless you're on Long Island, because I can just do iNaturalist and there's no border. There's no silos. We don't have herp search efforts siloed into false jurisdictions or, human jurisdictions. They matter to us, but not to the animals. And this is the distribution. I would call this the Appalachian 7. If that sounds familiar to people, there's a lot of species that have a distribution that runs sort of centered up and down the Appalachian Range in the United States, or Appalachian Range if you're from there. And then it has this jaunt to the west into the Great Lakes Basin. There's kind of two versions of it. There's this one where they're more northern and they come into the northern part of the Great Lakes Basin, and there's a different version where they go all the way down to Lake Georgia, and then they tend to cover all of the Great Lakes Basin, and those two distribution patterns repeat frequently in both plants and animals, and that's fascinating, and this is one of them. But okay. But what's interesting is that they're found throughout New York and Pennsylvania and a good chunk of Ohio, and yet in Ontario, as far as we know, they stop with the Frontenac Arch. So in our region and across southern Ontario, the southern limits are very curious, and they would benefit from some targeted searches to better refine our understanding of where they stop being in streams and why. And is that natural for some reason, or did we cause that with development, or a combination thereof? Very interesting. And then this is this is a carrot if it were an amphibian. They're orange and so cool. This is a four-toed salamander. Of the 7 species, mud puppies are hard, okay? But that's circumstantial because they're fully aquatic. And these, I think, are the hardest. These are, I think, the rarest in our region. And these are the ones that scare me the most. Four-toed salamanders, very interesting. They are a woodland salamander, like spotted salamanders, like red-backed salamanders. That is their summer habitat. But their breeding habitat is very specific. So here's the map. And look how spotty and isolated that is. Their breeding habitat is a shallow wooded wetland, swamp, basically, with thick moss overhanging the water. Typically, they prefer sphagnum mosses. They will use other types of moss if they're thick enough to do what they need to do and the sphagnum's not there. But if you've been in a wooded swamp with hummocks of sphagnum moss in shallow water, that's also clean, that's also like not cluttered with invasive species, shading out the understory, etc. If you've been in a habitat like that, you've been in a pristine habitat. That condition that they need to breed doesn't exist in young wetlands, and it doesn't develop, or young forests, I should say, and it doesn't develop quickly. It takes a lot of time. You need an old swamp to have that condition. They lay their eggs in the moss over the water, not in the water, but in the moss, and they guard them. And when the eggs are ready to hatch, the little larva wriggles out and plops down into the water below, and then grows up similar to a tadpole that's carnivorous and then transforms by the end of the year. But that specific kind of micro habitat that they need for breeding, for that they need a high quality forested environment. And then of course the forest has to be big enough to support a population of them. And typically these shallow wetlands, when we've come along and altered the landscape, that's what we drained. That 70% of the wetlands we lost historically, that's the kind of thing we're talking about. Cut down the trees for whatever we're cutting them down for. Let's farm this. Let's drain it. Let's ditch it. Let's tile it. And those shallow wetlands go away. So even if that forest regrows, that swamp doesn't come back. So what's happened now is these are confined to very specific sites where they still can find those very specific conditions. And, salamanders are basically immobile. Their opportunities to move through fragmented landscapes are very poor. And that's the thing. They're not a species at risk. They're not given any formal protection or status in that respect. And neither is that habitat. A black ash that is 200 years old at this point and healthy would be protected as an endangered species, as an individual tree because of the beetle, because of the emerald ash borer. That could protect a swamp inadvertently, but just an intact swamp with these conditions of it being old, that means nothing in conservation management. The fact that it supports this very specific species with a high fidelity for high quality habitat means nothing in conservation decisions at present, the way we currently do things. That's why this one scares me. Here it is across Southern Ontario. You can see kind of the same pattern through the Frontenac Arch, again, because it can't be farmed really well. There's a lot of habitat left there across the Canadian Shield. There's more opportunities for it. That's a stronghold of sorts, but still that's patchy too. And those dots around our area, there's probably more up around Algonquin. You see those scattered dots? Like, it's hard to search in there. Around Algonquin Park does okay, but around Algonquin Park's very hard to search. So there's probably a bit more up there, but down south, very scattered, very difficult. So Niagara escarpment supported stuff, specific sites, but huge parts of the landscape without them. Huge parts. And again, no protection. Here's another one. They're exciting. I haven't seen one yet this year. My average is 0 to 1 in a year with deliberate effort. All right. So let's move on to the reptiles, because we always talk about reptiles when we talk about amphibians, even though that makes absolutely no sense, because they have very little to do with each other biologically other than being vertebrates. We really should be talking reptiles and birds together, but people get mad when I say that. I don't know why. Okay, so turtles. Everybody likes turtles. And there's 8 names here, and they're kind of spread out here for a reason. So I mentioned that there were 8 species historically in our region and 6 currently. So we have the top ones there still. Snapping turtles, Midland painted turtles are both still widespread and found in most wetlands that can support turtles, period. They're more adapted to, for lack of a better word, crappy water conditions. They're more tolerant of anoxia and us messing with it. So they persist a little bit better. Northern knot turtles are particular to very large water bodies like the Ottawa River itself, big lakes. So like the Ottawa, the Rideau, big systems, but not little puddles and marshes and things. Blandings turtles, very popular turtle, very charismatic turtle, widespread at low density. The general theme here. Widespread at low density, and it needs to move long distances in the landscape for various reasons. And that's a challenge and a half to conserve turtles. And spotted turtles, which are very rare and very endangered, and we don't talk about where they are because they get very poached very easily for the pet trade, and that's bad. So, because you're removing them from the wild, that's why it's bad. Don't get a pet turtle. They're a lot of work. Wood turtles and eastern spiny soft shell turtles, we have good evidence that they were in our region, soft shells, at least in the Ottawa River system, wood turtles in our region. In the 1860s, one of the specimens in the museum was found in the 1860s downtown on a street, like on like Laurier or something, because the banks of the river are their habitat and the city was still new and they were still here. But where they currently are, for like the same reasons, we don't talk about where these still are because poaching. And yeah, those two, it seems, in our immediate area are no longer here. And the one I'm going to talk about a little more is the eastern musk turtle or the stinkpot. What to know about turtles, they're the most endangered group of vertebrates on the planet. Globally, 75% of these are at risk of extinction. 75% of species globally, according to the IUCN. In Canada, every single species we have is a species at risk. 100% of these are at risk. They're not doing well, and roads are not helping. It's the long, slow grind of attrition that is not sustainable and something we need to act on more quickly. But we'll come back to that. But let's talk about one of these. One of these. We could talk about all of them again all day. This thing, because we don't talk about this thing enough. And I think it's adorable. Look at that. Look at that face. If you have one, don't touch the face. Don't do it. Pound for pound, this thing has a stronger bite than a snapping turtle. If you want to find out, touch the face. If you do see one, you're lucky. They are hard to see. They are small. They're our second smallest turtle. The spotted turtle's the only one that's smaller. They stay small. They're not particularly colorful, and they don't bask openly very much. If they bask, it tends to be in a cryptic location or at night for some reason. I don't understand that one, but not a turtle. And yeah, they like shallow vegetated coves and calm wetlands and typically higher quality water, typically more oxygenated water. So not the super silty near urban stuff, but again, because they're little and inconspicuous, and they have cryptic habits, they get observed less frequently than our other turtles, even if some of those other turtles are more rare than they are. So this is the distribution as we understand it. What's new? So they do this thing. They do the thing that a lot of species do where they come across the southern edge of the Canadian Shield, which is a pattern that's common to a lot of species, not just herps, because southern Ontario south of there is too intense and they're extirpated. And then the southern edge of the shield still got habitat, and then north of there is too cold. So they come across there from Georgian Bay. They're found, still around Kingston, Prince Edward County pretty well. Frontenac Arch is good, where they're in lakes and rivers and small wetlands, and along big systems where there's little coves and bays where the water is calm. Because they don't swim well, they walk on the bottom, or they float under lily pads. Very cool, very peculiar turtle. They do this thing where they shoot up to Arnprior in this narrow band, which is weird. We'll come back to that. But what's newish, is we found they are a little more widespread than we thought. They're in the St. Lawrence Valley, past Cornwall. They're down towards like Cooper Marsh-ish. They're found in the Ottawa River itself, east of Ottawa, towards Rockland, and all the way up to Chalk River. Scattered records, few records, but clear records. That's the extent that we're aware of. The only part where they're known for sure in Quebec is again around Shawville, in that area. Now, we've also learned more recently that they're in the Rideau system. Uh, somebody saw one in Barhaven, in the Rideau. And it's not the only one. And so the Mississippi system and the Mississippi Snai is their local stronghold, but they're in these other major river systems. Why are they not as prevalent in the smaller wetlands, in the wetland complexes, where a similar wetland complex further south would host them? I don't know. Maybe they are there and we aren't sampling properly, or maybe they're not there for some other reason. But there's more to learn here. It's very interesting. It's intriguing. It's curious. So this is our little enigma in a half shell. Cowabunga. Um, that shoot up to Arnprior might look familiar. And it's because I pointed it out when we looked at the northern ribbon snake. It did a very similar thing. There's a similarity between these two distributions that I find very curious and puzzling. So that's the other one that has that narrow northern extent and also hits that part of Quebec and nowhere else in Quebec. Bizarre. Okay, last group. We're almost done. Snakes. And I'm only going to talk about 2 of the 7. Garter snakes and red-bellied snakes, widespread, fairly common. Garter snake's the one you're going to see the most. Red-bellied snake outnumbers them, but you won't see them. They're tiny, they're cryptic, mostly nocturnal. But they're out there eating your slugs. Water snakes, milk snakes, bizarre distributions, like west good, east bad. Ribbon snake, we just saw the distribution. And then ringneck snakes, a very poorly known species in our area. Here's one. Very underrated snake too. In the southeastern United States, a related subspecies, the southern ringneck snake, is abundant most of the time anywhere under anything. Northern ringneck snakes are not abundant ever. They are hard to find, and they have a specialized diet. Mostly they eat red-backed salamanders. 80+% of their diet is red-backed salamanders and other amphibians. Very cool natural history. I could go on. But as you imagine, diet specialization is limiting. In our modern landscape, generalists tend to do all right, like garter snakes, and specialists tend to be the ones that don't do as well with, us around. So these beautiful guys, also notice my hand's dirty, if that's, my hand's dirty, it's a theme. When I find these, I get very dirty. I don't know what that means yet, but I'm always filthy when I find these. Anyway, we've expanded our understanding of these. In 2013, there hadn't been any observations in the Ottawa region for like 25 years, for some reason. And I found one that year and put a little article about it in Trail and Landscape, and then kept looking. And since then, I found them in a couple more spots, and some other people have been out observing and found them in a couple more spots. Like a couple have turned up in Stony Swamp, and I found them in Voyageur Provincial Park, very far away from other known records, and a couple other scattered locations. We still have that gap, but again, they're specialists. They're very cryptic, very hard to find. They tend to be in cool forested habitat, which is not where you usually look for snakes. But yeah, this is another one where I have that question. They are associated with higher quality environments. They need a healthy population of salamanders, which means it's a healthy forest, which means it's a less disturbed forest. Here's the atlas map of the same thing across the province. And again, widespread, but very scattered, lots of red places. And I'm going to show you the same thing on iNaturalist. And again, watch what disappears. Huge areas with nothing. This is habitat fragmentation. This is the loss of their prey. Nothing in Prince Edward County. I know 2 spots there in my lifetime that used to have them. Rondeau, I believe. Rondeau Provincial Park in the Southwest used to have them. Nothing recent. A huge swath. So it's not just the Eastern Ontario hole, it's other parts of Ontario that have holes too, for probably related reasons. But again, ringneck snakes are just looked as widespread, and they're little, all the little snakes don't get a lot of attention. They have no formal status. I think these ones might get evaluated by Kasiwik soon. I think they're on a list I saw, which would be great. Because all of these species that are specialists, that have peculiarities, that have specific habitat needs, these are the ones that are truly vulnerable. These are the ones that should at least be special concern, in my own opinion, because not only are their occurrences becoming scattered, we don't have any mechanism to identify and protect those sites, that have their needs. You could have a 100-acre block of second growth forest and a 100-acre block of forest that was cut down and regrew and was never farmed. And that will, on paper, look like 100 acres of forest on one side, 100 acres of forest on the other. That one that was cut down and regrew is a higher quality habitat. It's going to have more original features, even if it doesn't have old trees, versus a farm field that regrew in the same age. And we don't have, again, a way to select for that, really, in conservation decisions. Not formally. Lastly, last species. Who's seen one? Hey, I like how there's more hands for this one. Yeah. Smooth green snakes are gorgeous. Same problem. There's a hole in the data. What's going on? Now we know we've got verbal reports. We've got a bunch of reliable verbal reports on these, including we've got near Russell, hereish, and then Maxville, which is hereish. So there's accounts of these being in other locations where we don't have formal records. And verbal reports on these, I trust a little bit more than usual because there's only one snake that's solid green. I saw a snake. What did it look like? Green. Okay, well, that was easy. You know, I saw a snake. What did it look like? Blotchy. Okay, we're not. Lots of those, stripy. Okay, but slimy. I was a worm. But green, there's only one that's green, right? Unless they saw a caterpillar and they're very confused, was probably this. Now anecdotally, whoops, what did I do? Yeah. Okay, here's the recent map. So we have that one dot there out in the far east on the border in the Ontario Atlas, and we haven't reconfirmed that on the Ontario side, but they're getting seen currently just over the border at a couple of spots in Quebec, which is promising. In the Ottawa context, there's only two regions that are good for these still. Marlborough Forest, generally speaking, and the Carp Hills, generally speaking. So if you're in those areas, keep your eyes open. You might get lucky. Anywhere close to agriculture, just in general, seems to be a no-go for these. And that might have more relevance than usual because they're insectivores. And pesticide use impacts their prey and might impact them. And I'll tell my story here in a sec. So widespread. Look, lots of red, lots of gaps appearing, more obvious when we look at it through the iNaturalist lens. So there's pockets of them. But the thing that makes us nervous here is anecdotally, these are getting either hard to find or impossible to find. And I have this experience, and I know a lot of people that have the same experience. I used to see them, and now I don't. I used to see them, and now I don't. And we've experienced this with little brown bats and, so many things that have just had crashes. I mean, Western chorus frogs, Pete's sake. So here's my story. This is my dad took this photo. It's the only photo I didn't take in here. My dad took this in 2001. I was looking for hognose snakes actually in Northumberland County. Didn't find one, but I found this. and he'd stayed in the car. He wasn't feeling well, and I found this under a log, and I carried it like a kilometer back to the car to show him because I thought he would enjoy seeing it. And he did. He's like, oh, let me take a picture. So I have a photographic record from film camera era when I didn't really take pictures of stuff I saw. I wrote in a little notebook and that was it. But I had this one. Um, and again, this was in 2001. And that was the last smooth green snake I saw until 2018. Now, camera quality's improved a bit. What my experience was is throughout the 1990s, I would find them regularly. And I wouldn't think anything of it. Not often like a garter snake or anything, but you go out wherever and occasionally, hey, a green snake. Cool. They're neat. They're pretty. And you let it go. And that's it through the 1990s to 2001-ish. And then nothing. And I didn't do anything differently. Other than maybe get taller, which, well, they're farther away now, but you know, Um, and that tracks with other people's experience. And that also tracks with the decline in abundance of grassland birds, which if you're tracking from the mid 90s to now have declined dramatically because they're insectivorous. And there's a correlation with the change in the use of pesticides, particularly those neonicotinoid pesticides, which have systemic effects, which might be accumulating in the animals. Sounds like DDT a little bit. So nothing super definitive in terms of peer-reviewed research that I've seen connecting that. I hope people are looking because the pattern is concerned. And there's certainly, for a small snake that hibernates individually in anthills, it just eats bugs. It loves grasshoppers in the fall. It's got pretty easy needs on paper. Why aren't they everywhere? I don't know. But I hope there's more coming up. So the challenges we're facing, a combination of these things. Habitat loss, we know about that. Fragmentation sort of goes hand in hand. And one of the things doing the fragmentation, not just the space between habitats, but also roads and road mortality. And like I said earlier, these animals, none of them are particularly mobile. And they just get hammered on roads. It's terrible. It's gross. And some folks have done a great job identifying hotspots and trying to get mitigation in the worst places. But, you know, there's resistance. There's people inflating the cost of these projects. Oh, yeah, I can install eco passages. Just give me way more money than you think this should cost. And then you get resistance to it from people who think I pay too much in tax. And we're losing biodiversity, and reptiles and amphibians are paying a heavy, heavy toll here, especially turtles and snakes. Um, and it's very frightening, but we've also got invasive species and they contribute. And I'll illustrate that real quick here. And as I've been mentioning, our conservation approaches and policies, because right now funding and conservation is really centered around species at risk, which is great. Because if you're a species at risk, if you're at imminent risk of extinction, we should be triaging that. We need to stop that, right? That's the put pressure on the wound kind of first aid that we need. But we also need to think about how do we keep the common species from becoming species at risk? How do we keep ecosystems intact? How do we keep ecological integrity and connectivity? And how do I identify those high quality features that sustain species like pickerel frogs and four-toed salamanders and ringneck snakes and help them move around in the landscape too, so they don't stay isolated in the long term, which is bad news. You know, we're protecting cold, clean water, by the way. If we're doing that for pickerel frogs, for mink frogs, for two-line salamanders, we're also helping fish. You know what likes cold streams? Trout. Anybody fish? Anybody know a good trout stream in Ottawa? No, you don't. They're they're cold water, right? So let's just illustrate. We've been looking at this map or some version of it all night. What do we see? Look at this is satellite. What do we see? Roads. What else? What are the color changes? What is it dark and light? Yes. Forest farmland. Intense farmland. Because New York's got farmland, but doesn't look like that. In Canada, because these are some of the most southern regions we have, some of the most climatically warm regions we have. From a national perspective, farming those makes a lot of sense. From an American perspective, it doesn't. Because it's like the worst climate they have. So that's you cross the border and suddenly the farms are more quaint and less intense, and there's less pressure to really squeeze the landscape. But here we only have so much farmland, and it gets squeezed, and we've been squeezing it for 200 years. And that intensity is great. Also, where do you think in Ontario has the highest rate of deforestation? Northwestern Ontario, up around Kenora, northeastern Ontario, like Kapuskasing, southwestern Ontario in the Carolinian zone, or southeastern Ontario, where we are. I'm telegraphing the answer, but yeah, southeastern Ontario has the highest rate of deforestation now, today, in Ontario. Like it's the most intense here. It's not just intense, it's the most intense here. And you can see it if you zoom in. Let's zoom in somewhere between Kemptville and Castleman. There's Winchester. What's the landscape look like? Desolate to me. It's fields. Tiny hedgerows or no hedgerows. A little bit along that river. Some cool oak trees on that river. It's a different story. But very little habitat, and the little bits that are there are definitely not connected. If you were a frog getting from place to place, that's a long hop. If you're a salamander, you won't make it. Let's go east of Alexandria. It's just across the border into Quebec. The field shapes are a little different, but it's the same idea. So look at those little blocks of woods. They're scattered and they're separated, and that's all that there is in this huge landscape here. So no wonder we're not finding anything. This area is some of the earliest settlement in Upper and Lower Canada after the American Revolution too. It's been a long time in this state. So those blocks that we have, where we have preserved woodlands or preserved habitat in general, we have set land aside to be in a natural state. An awful lot of it looks like this. When it was set aside, a lot of it was a bit of a mosaic. There's some open areas, some recovering fields. Lately, those open areas are closing up. And so your options are dense second growth woodland or that agricultural field. Your dense second growth woodland looks like this inside. Lots of trees, narrow, tight, close together, full canopy. You don't get the variation canopy height. You don't get the variation in light on the floor. This isn't what an original forest looks like. This is a rapidly growing, even age succession, and that's all red maple too. There's no diversity in the tree species. We basically extirpated pine and oak and hemlock in our selective logging practices before the clear cutting happened. Another whole other talk. And then look at the understory. You see that even layer of green? That's all glossy buckthorn. That's an invasive species. So not only are we losing the biodiversity in trees and the canopy height variation, et cetera, that even carpet there is shading the forest floor. You're losing the spring ephemerals and the other understory herbaceous plants. And where is the diversity of the native shrubs? They're outcompeted, right? There's no pin cherry, there's no choke cherry, there's no, what would be here, wild raisin, there's no dogwoods. You know, all of this diversity of native shrubs that would provide different types of cover and different types of food for different types of wildlife. It's not there. Even aged young red maples and glossy buckthorn. And you get to the edge and it's a road or it's a field. I took that last weekend off Dewberry Trail. So this is a protected area. This is in the Greenbelt. When I moved here, this is one of the first areas I visited, and the glossy buckthorn wasn't like this. This is actively happening. So like they're declining, even though they're protected, they're declining. There's no money to save this stuff. There's no money to act on this, right? That's looking down. That's the glossy buckthorn carpet. There's a little bit left right there in the bottom right. You can spot some Canada Mayflower and some horsetail. Those are native. The trail edge is there, so that's why they're still there. This should be a carpet of Canada Mayflower and blue bead lily and starflower and good luck. Good luck, right? So that's a huge challenge because where are the resources and the effort to deal with that? I'm not blaming the NCC, by the way. I'm showing you one of their prices, but they don't have the budget or the people for this, and that's not their fault. We need to demand more. So let's look at a wetland. I walked down the trail. There's a nice little crossing of a beaver wetland. Let's look down the wetland. Oh, it's very pretty. That's a nice place. Little beaver channel. Well, first of all, the shrub there on the left, that's leaning into the photo, that's glossy buckthorn. And there's also glossy buckthorn in the top right. We do have winterberry holly coming in. That's a native shrub, that's a plus. But the channel, look at that nice channel through the wetland. It's probably okay, right? No, it's choked with European frogbit. Where's the duckweed? Where's the duckweed that used to cover these? The native vegetation that used to float here. Turtles aren't used to moving through this, or fish. This isn't supposed to be here. That's not looking great. So these are challenges. And I think the invasive species one is underrated because I just named a bunch of plants and plant community stuff in a herp talk. And we don't do that. We don't cross-pollinate. We talk about herps, we talk about herps, we talk about plants in a totally different forum. And we don't necessarily always connect these ecological things. So when I talk about an old growth swamp with sphagnum hummocks, I'm talking about salamanders as much as I'm talking about trees. Right? These ecological connections are important and we need them to inform our conservation decision making. But that road mortality thing, it's not enough. We got more to do, but we're starting. This is just outside Dewberry Trail. This is Anderson Road. I'm so happy with this. The NCC tells me they've only got so much money. So they're starting with this, but I have been scraping turtles off this pavement since 2012. Multiple species. And Anderson Road cuts right across Mere Bleu, and it goes through a wetland and over a ridge and through wetland again and over another ridge and over wetland, and then you're out. And so the northernmost section has the most carnage, and the data shows that. The NCC did some studies there, and members of the community, including me and other people who bothered to stop and record things and contribute to iNaturalist, contributed to data that supported their decision that we can build one, we're going to put it here where it's the worst. And this went in this year. So this is good news. We're getting there. Look at this, brand new fence. And look, and I'm not knocking the NCC again, but look, this isn't a perfect fence. This isn't the ideal fence. I would prefer the solid 1/4 inch mesh all the way up, an angled top. That would be more robust. Like they've got the plastic cover to prevent things from climbing over. They've got fine mesh that's only partway up the chain link. But that's less expensive and that let them get something in the ground. And something's a heck of a lot better than doing nothing for another 10 years. So I am more than happy to see this happening. And then you can look down that channel and yeah, there's purple loosestrife and there's Phragmites and there's frogbit, and damn it, maybe we'll get rid of it one day. But the turtles moving up and down that are going to hit that culvert and they're not going to be able to get on the road. They're going to have to go through it. And I'm not going to have to scrape them up off the pavement. And that's pretty awesome. So there's more to do. There's more to do. We have a project, I talked about it. It's now the legacy project. It's staying there. It's got important data. But now there's a new project as of like last night, because I needed the screenshot for this presentation. been in the works, but this accelerated things. What's good now, you join this project, you don't have to manually add every observation. If you're on the old project, there's a link to this one. So your observations will automatically be added. And because of the at-risk status of several of our species, if you trust this project with the specific coordinates rather than the obscured ones, you'll help us zero in on habitat parcels specifically and hotspots where we need to do more work to document things and show this place is important for conservation in a regional way. This place is significant in a regional way. The obscured data is great, but if you trust with the data, that's helping us. It's us. And we can do more detailed work and give you things like that water snake map where we're breaking it down. So that's your call, but please do join the project. Please get out there and observe things. Please, when you're out for a walk, document what you see. Look around. Look down a little bit. Is that what I think? Maybe you need to do a double take. What is there? No way. No way. Oh, it is. Okay. If that's what you see, if you know how, if you're comfortable doing it safely and respectfully, and it's going to bolt before you can get the photo, I give you permission to pick it up. If you know how, be nice, be careful, but it's okay. It's so calm. They're so nice. Okay. Because the data on these things is very important. If you inconvenience that for 30 seconds to get a photo, that's very important for that whole species right now. We need this. And if all you can do is just get a shot of the tail, just the back end as it scoots away from you. If that's all you got, that's fine. That's fine. That's still data. You can still prove what that is. Sometimes the end is all we need. Still took too long. Sorry. I have time for questions. Other people might be getting tired, but that's fine. Yeah. Are there online questions?
Nothing online.
Okay. Does anyone here have questions?
Obscured,
yeah. Yeah.
Vision obvious. So that one you just showed us,
that's
obscured to everyone, but you guys or?
Okay, so what that happens, so some species obscure automatically because somebody has said this is a sensitive species and the specific points shouldn't be available to the whole world to see just like that. But through these projects, you can make those specific coordinates available to people if you trust them. So if you trust us to look at them. So like if someone has a project, I sell spotted turtles, don't trust them. They want to go kidnap the spotted turtles and sell them to pet stores in Hong Kong or something. Very real problem with that species. But, you know, the problem is, the challenge on this end is northern map turtles automatically obscure. Now they have particular habitat, so we can kind of figure out that they're kind of in the river, but the obscured box that iNaturalist uses projects a random point and something that's like 20 by 20. It's an enormous geographic area. It's much bigger than those 10 by 10 squares that the Atlas uses. And other species obscure too. So because Jefferson salamanders are endangered and blue spotted salamanders are kind of related to them through this unisexual complex, and again, it's a long story, we're not doing it tonight. Blue spotted salamanders are automatically obscured. That's silly, because they share this relationship in this complex and they could be misidentified as each other. And we don't have Jefferson salamanders, but if you're finding a blue spotted salamander in a new location and you haven't shared that coordinate data with this project, I can't tell. I can't tell. I know you found a blue spotted salamander, but right now we having trouble mapping specifically where the blue spotted salamander is in and around Ottawa. So is it in this woodland? Is it in that woodland? what's going on at that local scale, we can't see it because the obscured is too much of a mystery. Now, if you're worried about sensitivity, you can always choose for it to be sensitive. So I usually obscure my smooth green snakes because I don't want eager herpers to be like, oh, let's see, and go to exactly where I was and then disturb everything. I usually obscure milk snakes too, usually, for the same reason. So you can choose to put it as obscured or private, and you can choose in the options, I believe, to share automatically obscured data or all data, but there's an option where you can not share it if you've chosen to obscure it with a specific project. Like there's some nuances in the settings there. But conversely, if you're worried that you don't want the general public to see something, just obscure it. Just obscure it. So if you're contributing to a project, that project can see it, but then the world doesn't. You can still put it on there. It's a pretty wide area if you're not sure that it's going to default to something. If you see something like a spotted turtle, it's going to default to private. It's gone. It doesn't show up in searches. If I search the map, I can't do that map for you with spotted turtles because you can see their range in the United States, but it looks like they don't even live in Canada because in Canada, them and wood turtles, they're all private. They don't exist to the general search. And that's important to protect them. They're very sensitive. Does that explain some of that? Who else was Bethany?
I'm just bothered because how do you deal with the fact that you just don't have people out looking as much in certain areas? My country property is sort of east of Barnacle.
Mhm.
Just north of the 509, that's Pleasant. And in that area, you have, in most of those things, there is nothing showing, but there's stuff there.
Yeah. Yeah. And so we have to interpret with that in mind for what we're looking at in terms of like the area we're looking at. You remember the mink frog map? The southern ridge of the mink frog range when we zoomed out was pretty dense. It was pretty comprehensively mapped with observations in the southern areas where there's people and there's roadways and there's access. And it goes very far north, like James Bay and Labrador, right? But those widely scattered observations are definitely not suggesting absence. They're definitely suggesting that it's very remote and very difficult to access. And yeah, of the very few people that are up there, a very small subset are looking. And so that search effort or recording, exactly. So that search effort thing is part of it, but within our region, that's also partly why we're focused on this eastern tip of Ontario, because the west side, remember the comparison I had there, the red-bellied snake? In 1981, it was well sampled on the west side of Ottawa. And our recent sampling shows that it's evenly distributed across Ottawa. It was a search effort bias. So part of what this whole initiative is to counterbalance that lack of search effort historically, to make sure that we're going more frequently to sites that haven't had that search effort. We're trying to get to new areas across Eastern Ontario and check them out and then see where should we go back and do more intense work because the habitat was good or whatever. Yeah, so basically, how do we balance for that? We get out there and look and try to fill those gaps ourselves. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes. 100% yes.
But I know what area.
Yep. Yes. Yes. Yeah. The more all data is good. So the more precise you can be, the better. But that shows us patterns over time. That shows presence absence in a general way. If you've got a broad circle and you can't narrow it down more, that's still good. That's still good. And that's still going to illuminate things in areas that maybe we can't or haven't been to.
Yeah.
So that's very valuable. The older, honestly, as far as iNaturalist is concerned, the older the data you have, the better, because that's what it's really missing. Martha. Yeah. Fully unique to Canada? Are the herps fully unique to Canada? No, but the mink frog almost. Very northern New York State, like New England, northern New York, and like Wisconsin, Minnesota, I think northern Michigan.
See trends like because of climate change, you see that the ranges are for a lot of people,
No, I mean,
or their own.
the impact of habitat destruction and fragmentation is so strong and so intense, it's blocking that. So mink frogs, being a northern species, we might see them. Again, speculative. It depends how exactly the climate change plays out, but we might see that southern limit creep north. We're expecting that with some plants too, like white spruce and balsam fir. We're expecting the southern limits to move north as it gets hotter down here. Other than that, I don't think we're expecting southern things to move north because they can't, because they're struggling as is. So like people wonder about things like rat snakes, are they going to expand northward? Well, to do that, they need to be doing well. They're not. They need to be able to distribute themselves, disperse themselves, I mean, in the landscape. And because it's so fragmented and full of roads, to be able to do that would be difficult. Frogs have the best shot because they have explosive reproduction. But on the reptile side, the animals that have long lives as adults, like turtles and some snakes, where the adults are naturally long-lived and the reproductive recruitment rate is very low, they're struggling. And they don't have that power to overcome what we're doing to them, even if the climate's getting better, because, you know, it's too intense.
It's about iNaturalist. So you can see you need a photo, you need GPS, for instance. See, I'm not that familiar with iNaturalist. Is there a good tutorial, or is there this club ever give a presentation?
Yes, and
There is one, obviously.
yes,
No.
yes.
Well, I would love one,
The-
obscure
the-
coordinates or what.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Just, and then
So-
my final question.
Yep.
If you ask people, then is, so it's charitable donation season. And thinking of conservation projects, is there any place we could, if we wanted to give to a charity, is there something you could recommend for this area that would help?
For this area, well, probably so many.
Just a question.
Herpetologically speaking, charitably, Ontario Nature has done a lot of work for this, continues to do a lot of work for this. They have a long-term stake monitoring protocol and ongoing studies. They also own nature reserves that they actively manage in a way that other agencies don't, that keeps their habitats in better shape, that reduces the impact of invasive species. They have ecological processes like Stone Road, Alvar, and Pelee Island still receives traditional burns, as it should. Most properties like that, Alvars and savannas and things, aren't getting the fire regime that they need, and that ultimately hurts the biodiversity that's there. So they do a great job, and they are the ones that spearhead a lot of the Ontario, the Atlas and other reptile and amphibian work in Ontario. So I really like them. The Ontario Turtle Conservation Center rehabs turtles that are found injured on roads. I sent them a turtle this year that I found upside down on Highway 7. And that helps sort of staunch some of the loss from road mortality. And the Canadian Wildlife Federation, which is based here in Ottawa, which has a representative here, they do a lot of turtle work. And you can ask him after maybe if he's not leaving in a hurry. But they, well, we do stuff, but
How much were you paid for this work?
oh yeah, how much was I paid to do all of this work? Great question. $0.
Volunteer organization.
This is, we are supplementing what's funded. My beef with species at risk funding that I mentioned a couple times, like there's not enough people, there's not enough biologists, there's not enough funding. Like this is so anemic that what we can do as volunteers is fill in gaps. So I can go out with my weekend time and my passion and my experience and my knowledge and fill gaps that aren't going to get filled another way because there's no funding, you know, and then these other agencies are picking up slack where they have funding and staffing. So like I was just saying, Canadian Wildlife Federation does a lot of turtle nest protection, and they will extract turtle eggs from roadside nests and incubate them and then release those hatchlings. And that's an awesome head starting program. And you know, there's usually something in the news cycle about that. I saw albino Blandings turtles this year, which is a really cool, exciting thing from our region. But that's a really cool project. So there's some things that need money, that benefit from funding, and we are a club of naturalists that are doing this for the love of advancing conservation.
So I will say that there's been a lot of requests for maybe a hands-on workshop kind of thing for naturalists, and that's great. I know also Dave Seaburn did have an article in the Trail Landscape very recently about iNaturalist as well.
Yeah.
So if you have a recent copy, that was probably the last copy, I think, right? The most recent copy. Check that out. There's a nice summary there as well. But I think hands-on would be also good.
It would. iNaturalist is pretty easy. They do have some stuff on the site themselves. Yeah, take a photo, upload it. So for this, you don't need a GPS. So if you're using your phone and you're doing it live, your phone knows where it is. That's one way. But I don't do that. I have a SLR, like a real camera, and I know where I am. And so you plot it. You use Google Maps, the same Google Maps we've been looking at, and you can put your pin and you're uploading the observation. It's like, where was this? And you go on the map and you zoom in and you put a little dot where you were. So you don't need a GPS. You just, if you know spatially where you were, roughly, you can just pin it and that's it.
We will add a event slot for
Yeah, we can pull
just
it off.
anything to do this kind of way. So look at that.
Can I make a pitch for a conservation organization that you might want to consider?
Sure.
The Mississippi Battle lost some land.
Oh, yes. Very good.
Its territory from west of Ottawa over to Highway 41, from Highway 7 up to 17. And it has areas of land that have been donated by people, or people put conservation agreements on their property, which protects the properties. And they've got quite a few properties now. They've just recently bought 2 more in the North Frontenac, Abington Highlands area. And you know, these are properties that might cost $400,000, so they have to do a lot of fundraising for that. So that's one. If you go on to mmlt.ca, you will find it. Thank you.
No problem. Yes, land trusts. Great. MMLT, great regional one. Really great stuff that they've conserved. Questions over here? I saw a hand going up and down. Or I know. Anything else? Yeah.
Historical data, past and observations. I was wondering with for search bias with the like rare books of notes stuff, if there's ever any like overlapping of the data or ways to submit like areas that were surveyed with the intent or hope to find them, like affected areas is without any
Like a null result.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question. The Atlas had a provision for that, to submit like a null search. But yeah, that's a very good thought and a very difficult thing. iNaturalist, I don't think there's a 0 option. The maps too, the Atlas maps, one of their advantages is that grid sort of levels it out, right? Because you don't get the bunching of the near urban things. It's just present, right? So if there's 10,000 observations in this square of the species and 2 in the neighboring square of the species, it's just present and present. So it's a bit leveling in that way, which is helpful. And iNaturalist, you get that clustering. But on the other hand, the clustering, it kind of tells on itself too, because you see that and like, okay, well, I don't need to check there. Let's go into the void, you know. Yes, but dealing with null searches is a very good question and a difficult one to have a super satisfactory answer on. But keep looking is the best option. Do you have another?
Quantity data, it's in your own private one, and
Yes.
you know, there are thousands of frogs, you know, it's 10.
Yes.
Those many frogs, thousands, but you want to get an idea of quantity, but on private land, how do you do that?
Well,
I want to say.
yeah, I mean, and that's tricky. There's different ways to approach that. So the atlas was great. It had a field per quantity. So if you saw one pond of 200 frogs, it was one observation of 200 frogs, which is great. Now on a naturalist, if you just show them, I wouldn't do multiple observations for that. I'd just have a lot. If you have an estimated quantity, you can put it in comments or notes or observation fields. When people are overlapping, so that's two things that the clustering will show is one is search effort bias, where, you know, near urban area gets a lot of visits. But the other thing it can show when that search effort is roughly even, if you know that another way, is that if you've got a lot of observations of a species from one place and generally few in other places, that can give you a sense of abundance. But again, if there's a leveling mechanism, so I can do that with my own observations sometimes. So I know how frequently I visit a particular site and I keep track. And so if I only filter and look at just me, I can say, well, when I visit this place, I've seen this many, and I have 10 observations from here, and I visit this place just as much, and I have one observation from there. And I keep parallel notes, so I know how long I was at a place and stuff like that. So then there's ways to process that to say, well, search effort means the same search effort got me more here, so they're more abundant here. But yeah. Again, a good question. Not super easy to get a very awesome answer all the time on that one, but we are so lacking in just basic data. It doesn't come up as much as you'd think. So really, we just need the basic presence absence data across a lot of this. Like still, like basic data is still lacking. So it's all welcome. Yeah.
Field, I wasn't working, worked in multiple fields, but right now those are things like narrow and not the skill sets that we have.
Yeah.
What about more localized bioblitzes coupling with something like Ontario Nature, one of the more major organizations that's tracking data with the NHIC?
Yeah.
Where we gather a bunch of people and we can do a bigger search instead of like, you often, you know, going off the day in this creek and I'm over here canoeing in a pond. I don't know if that's an approach that could.
It is a good idea. And we have done that. We have done that. We've had some initiative over time. So one of the recent things that we did through the Conservation Committee was a series of visits to property owned by Ontario Power Generation around Morris Island. So there's the conservation area, which is theirs and leased to the Conservation Authority, and then there's a lot of land around that. And we helped survey that, but not just one time, like multiple visits over time. And that involved inviting all the people we could get to agree to come out on the weekend, or whenever we could get in, and do exactly that and do some intensive searching. And we've done that at other properties. We did that. There's another land trust in Eastern Ontario that's new, and we helped survey one of their properties. That's something that the Conservation Committee actually actively does, and it is a very great way to do it. And one of the things that I really like about iNaturalist is because we can be either doing these big initiatives as groups, or we can be in our own individual projects, or maybe we're working in silos. But if this platform, because it's global and because it's all taxa, lets us all contribute those deliberate observations and those incidental observations in one place, because of those silos, we don't always know who's looking at what and who's researching what. And this data, because it's accessible, it's verifiable, like it's all photo vouchered, right? Or sound vouchered in some cases. You know, like I can research whatever species I want on the other side of the country to a degree from here. And I don't have to go visit that herbarium or that collection of specimens and make appointments. I can see the photos from anywhere, and anyone can. And that's really good. The NHIC gets data reports from this. When you report rare tracked species, you can join their project, and I join their project. So my rare species are automatically reported to NHIC whenever I find those, and it helps their track of those species. Dave, you haven't had a turn. Yeah.
Starting September 21st, 28th, called the Great Canadian Biopics. Encouraging everyone to get out and post observations of everything. It's a special drum, join on iNaturalist for the social media going out on various channels. The idea is to just encourage us to get out before it gets too cold and stuff.
Nice. Okay, the back.
So. Can you comment about landing restrictions to get onto the tiny little pilots that may have those? You know, how Jonathan has basically fixed on to not to go that way because it's all part of it. I think that's part of it too, right? That was once ago.
Yeah. Yeah, so if you didn't hear up here the questions about land ownership in this big agricultural landscape, like getting permission to go on some of these sites that might still have things. And yeah, that is a challenge. And where we have had permission to go on private sites, it's been great. And there's a few of those where we've secured that and we visited and we've been impressed. And that may not just be herpetological things, but there's significant like botanical things. And there's data gaps in this part of the world for lots of things, if you can believe it. And so yeah, but at the same time, it's not as devoid of public land as you'd think. They're not huge, they're not, yeah, they're not as, yeah, they're there. There's conservation areas around. They are, what's the one? SDG. Oh, it's SDG County Forests. Oh, I'm thinking of. So Stormont, Dundas, and Glengarry is a series of county forests. If you go to their website, they've got a bunch of sites that are open to the public. I have not yet been to many of them, and many of them look very promising. You know, and then there are some big ones. Somerstown Forest, near Cornwall, is enormous. And when we talk about this, we often think we need to go there more. There's still things to see in there for sure. Like there's the Gary Fen complex near Alexandria is actually quite large, and there's a lot to explore in there. Actually, you've been there with me one time. Yeah. But like I need to go there more. Like I've been there 3 times, 4 times ever. And there's a lot of little conservation authorities and public woodlands and things here and there. So we can make a lot out of those if we do a better job visiting those. But yeah, private landowner contact is very helpful when we can get it. And we're doing what we can do. We've had a few. But yeah.
Hey, we know a lot about
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Good. Most people are gone, so we can wrap it up. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for your questions.